Good morning, thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Booth and I'm the Communications Manager here at Morepay. It's my pleasure to introduce the topic to you for this morning, which is building better line managers. So in terms of the agenda for this morning, Michelle will start off by discussing the role of line managers in implementing organisational policies. She'll then discuss ways to support and upskill line managers before delving into some of the consequences of underinvesting in crucial training. And Michelle will also cover essential people skills for line managers, and finally she'll examine how you can develop line managers in key areas such as recognition, performance, engagement and work-life balance. Almost 10 million people in the UK are line managers, and whilst some handle the stresses and strains of management well, others may struggle with some elements. In a recent survey that we ran throughout January and February, we gained the views of 600 people who work in HR roles across the UK. And one of the questions we asked was, what are your priorities for learning and development over the next 12 months? And manager training was in fact the top priority. So it's clearly on people's minds and on their agenda for the year ahead. So a couple of practical things before we start. How to ask a question. You'll see that we have got a Q&A session at the end of the main presentation, and we definitely do want to hear from you. Your microphones are on mute, but you can drop your questions into the Q&A panel as shown on the screen here. Another note, if you're facing technical difficulties, don't worry too much. We will be sending you all a recording and a copy of the presentation from today. However, if you are facing technical difficulties, please do flag it in the question panel, because if lots of them come flooding through, I'll know there's an issue at our end and I can do my best to try and fix it for you. So before I do hand over to Michelle for the main presentation, I'm conscious that we will have people on the webinar this morning that aren't familiar with Morepay. So I'll give a very brief introduction. We provide payroll and HR software as well as outsourcing services to UK businesses. We've been around since 1966, have all the accreditations you'd expect, and we're rated excellent on Trustpilot. Our promise is to make payroll and HR easy, and here's how we do it. We've built payroll and HR software that's easy. We deliver quality outsourcing options, and all of this means worry-free compliance for businesses. On the slide, you can see some of the businesses who trust us to take care of their payroll and HR. So that's enough about us. Let's move on to today's presenter. If you've attended some of our webinars in the past, you'll be familiar with Michelle. Michelle's our HR Services Director, and she's been with Morepay since 2017. She's CIPD qualified with over 18 years of experience in both operational and strategic HR. So I'll now hand over to Michelle to take you through today's session on line managers. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks everyone for attending this webinar. So to talk then about the role of a line manager and what is the role of a line manager, it might seem like there's a really obvious answer to this, or one perhaps that we feel we could answer easily. And even though we know from our survey that a lot of people are thinking about line manager training, it may even seem like this isn't one of the top topics that we talk about for a webinar, but this is exactly why we've chosen to discuss it. And if we go on to the next slide, then I can just start to talk to you about why it is so important. And the main word that I want to focus on here is that word there, crucial, the crucial role of line managers. I think as a topic in general, we as HR leaders, business owners, we should regularly step back and review the role of our line managers in the organisation, what they are doing for us, where the gaps are, and what do we need to do to support them. Times change. We all know that over the last few years in particular, the roles of line managers have changed it's almost in an unprecedented way. You think back to pre-COVID, what we expected of line managers then, they had to very quickly adapt to managing people at home, then back to managing hybrid working. It's constantly changing and evolving, which is why it's really important that as a topic, it's something that we should revisit, review, and keep talking about how to make things better. And I guess just overall, don't underestimate the importance of the line managers in your business towards how your business performs overall. So the roles of line managers then, so it says here on the slide about an employee's experience of work, it's greatly influenced by the culture around them. And part of this comes from the standard that their line managers create in the team. Line managers are the people that they have the most contact with on a regular basis, that are kind of in authority to them, and they will look to them to set the example. People managers play a really vital role in determining the health, wellbeing and engagement of their team. They are absolutely crucial in setting the standards for that. And CIPD research found that poor management style is a main cause of work-related stress. And you'll see the poll at the bottom, which said 75% of workers who voluntarily leave their jobs do so because of their bosses, not the position, the role, or the company. It is quite a common saying that people will leave a manager, not necessarily the company. It's not always true, but in this context, it's really important to understand how critical line managers are. I think even when people have been promoted, you need to think about what you have done to help them be promoted into that line manager role. What have you done to upskill? And effective line manager support is really crucial. On to the next slide then, we're just going to talk about how it's important for them, in those in line manager roles, to support the people profession. So to put this into perspective, line managers are under an intense amount of pressure to develop high-performing teams, but they've got to do this while making sure that they follow HR policies and support employee well-being. There's quite a complex dynamic to being an all-round people manager, and we need to look at how best to support that. A lack of training in people managers can really negatively impact the implementation of organisational policies, employee experience, and ultimately employee retention levels. And this part here is quite important, and obviously a bit close to my heart, being an HR professional myself. Employment tribunals do come down hard on inadequate or out-of-date policies and procedures that have led to an employment tribunal situation. But it's important to note that they're actually equally critical when procedures are adequate, but that managers have failed to follow them in the best way possible. And we've seen examples of expensive court and tribunal settlements that have focused on inadequate and inappropriate management decisions or behaviours. And that is something really tangible that we need to think about whilst looking at this. And then a question that I'd ask you to think about is, how satisfied are you that your managers are well briefed and understand how to deal with bullying, sexual harassment, equality, diversity, inclusion, all these topics that are becoming really important. The role of a manager has changed so much, and there is so much more involved in it, and you need to be really confident that they can deal with issues or situations that arise. Could they deal with a whistleblowing, a flexible working request, a subject access request, personal data breach, all the things that might fall at their feet? Do they adequately know how to deal with them? Or even more simply, do they know where to go for support on that? And it's really important to create that alignment with the people profession. I think what you need to think about doing in terms of helping line managers is make sure that they are there to enable HR, OD and L&D policies and help them bring them to life. Help them understand how to identify learning needs and embed learning in a workflow. Manage the workflow of the team by supporting and guiding the work of others, and then collaborate with the people profession to support changes. It sounds like I'm oversimplifying it there, but I think it's really important to look at it in that context and think about how we can help them going forward, and how important it is that line managers and the HR and people profession and functions are really aligned on doing this. So I guess then the biggest question is how to do this. So if we flick on to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about upskilling line managers. Now, depending on the size of your organisation, will depend on how many line managers you've got, and you will probably have a mixture of the levels of skills and experience within your line manager, and that's a good thing. You're not always going to be able to bring in line managers into a role who are the most experienced you need, have got the skills in everything that they need to do. You're going to have an array of people in there. The main thing you need to think about is the importance of training, but as I'll talk about later on, that isn't the only aspect of it. And it isn't just about sending someone in a course and being done with it. You know, how to be a manager, tick, we've taught them how to be a manager. The importance of training, I would describe it as being one part of a jigsaw, a piece of a jigsaw. And you need to think about how being a manager is a really busy and demanding role. Yet managers, and we've talked about it here, they're often time poor and then receive little management training, so handling these issues can prove challenging. How do you as an organisation adopt this positive management approach and help people save time by preventing issues from arising, or when they do, that these people know how to deal with it effectively? And one of the biggest things that you can do is start to build the right infrastructure to support these managers. And the infrastructure really comes from the HR team and comes from the organisation overall, which is about getting the right people policies in place, communicating these policies clearly, regularly and effectively, and then thinking about what technology you've got that can help streamline these processes and really help managers feel that they are part of something important and that they have got a really important role to play in it. We just go on to the next slide then. This is kind of a bit of the jigsaw around training that I have talked about in terms of developing line managers. And these are all really important areas to look at. The first one is talking about coaching and mentoring. Coaching and mentoring by other peers, professionals, it's really important. That is how skills and managers, do forgive me 1 second, my dog is barking like mad and I'm conscious it's going to interrupt, so just give me 1 second. Apologies. There was a squirrel in the garden and she'd spotted it. Moving on then from coaching and mentoring, talking about shadowing. So shadowing is a really great opportunity to allow other managers during a typical working day to understand how other people do it. So whether they're a manager already or whether they're wanting to be a manager, giving them the opportunity to experience this, it's something that should be followed through, and a reflective conversation helps identify learning points and actions. Secondments are also a great way to think about developing your line managers. And secondments about a temporary movement into another role. So you might have somebody who is showing potential in their current role and is looking to move into line management, has a secondment opportunity opened up. Somebody might have gone on maternity leave. Somebody might be being seconded somewhere else, and that creates a bit more of a short-term opportunity, and it can help managers broaden their skills, knowledge and experience. But it also helps the organisation to really bring through and develop their own skill base. Knowledge sharing is another great way, and learning from peer to peer is a really effective way to increase manager skills. It can be something that happens informally, or if you look more at your L&D department or the person who's responsible for L&D, that's something that they can facilitate with webinars, with Q&A sessions, and getting senior managers to talk about their experience, how they got into management, because everyone has had to start somewhere. It's a great learning opportunity for all involved. Creating communities of practice. So whether in person or virtual, creating some kind of community is a really good opportunity to share good practice, experience and ideas. This can be something that's formal or a bit more informal within the organisation, or it could be something that's external. There might be organisations or bodies that you can get involved in to help share around that community of practice. And then just finishing with the most formal one, most obvious one, sorry, which is formal learning. Many formal management development courses are around. There are qualifications, apprenticeships. You can develop your own internal formal courses on how to manage effectively, covering a wide variety of topics. There is always a place for that, and it's something that should be always looked at. And it's a great way to sort of incentivise and engage your people managers. Moving on then. And talking about the importance of investment. So the investment that I've talked about already is about all the different areas that you can think about as a business of how to get people up to the right skill level. But what I would like you to think about before I just talk about this is think about how many times you have seen people promoted into people management positions. Sometimes people are promoted into internal management positions because you see the potential there in them. They don't necessarily have the experience of people management, but you've spotted potential there. I have seen over my career, though, where people haven't even necessarily been promoted because of their potential. They've actually been promoted because they are really good at the job they do. And that on its own is not enough to make a people manager. It might be part of the jigsaw, whereas, you know, for example, I don't know, a customer service executive might be excellent at their job and they are promoted to be customer service team leader. That is what maybe one part of the jigsaw that you need to put together to make an effective people manager. But it is not that alone. And especially if you put them in that role and then just kind of leave them to get on with it and expect them to know this complex web of policies, procedures, intangible things like well-being, engagement that they might need to focus on. It's so important that when people are promoted, that you take the time, the money and the resource to invest in upskilling them. And we talked on the previous slide about all the different ways that you can do this in addition to formal training. But make sure that that does not happen to you. If you are promoting someone or you are taking somebody on who is a little less experienced in people management, or they might even be really experienced in people management, but because they're new, they don't know the ways of your organisation, take the time to invest in different ways of upskilling them. Because the truth is, the risk of underinvestment is that overall business performance could suffer. It's absolutely vital to ensuring that there are not only things like employee well-being, but really strong business outcomes. And underinvestment in people management can lead to retention problems. We talked right at the beginning how a poor people manager can lead to employees leaving in the organisation. It can directly affect productivity because these line managers are responsible for the distribution of work. They are the ones overseeing the work. And if they are not doing that in an effective way, or their style is not right, then that will directly impact the productivity of the organisation. Engagement, they are really responsible for boosting the engagement and the morale in their team and looking after the well-being of their team. And if there is an underinvestment, or you as an organisation are not getting right, engagement is going to suffer. Look at how you review and record engagement. Do you have engagement surveys? Is there an opportunity for employees to tell you how they feel, whether that's in an anonymous survey or a more open forum? It's really important to understand how the teams feel and how also they feel about their managers. There's lots of different areas of engagement, but how they feel about their managers is really important. And identifying any issues and then investing in resolving them is going to help a lot. Line managers also help with recruitment and onboarding and making sure that they are proficiently trained, skilled and understood in that will shape how a new employee feels about this organisation that they've joined. And overall, it will generally link to customer satisfaction and the performance of the business. The famous saying of happy employees mean happy customers. It's a lot more complex than that, but the basis of that rule applies, and applies even more so to line managers and how they can help their team really focus on customer satisfaction. And it's just all linked in overall to performance management, whether that's the management of the individuals and how they are performing in their work, or the performance of the business. These 6 items on here are a really key thing to look at and really focus on when you're thinking about why it's so important to talk about people management and the importance of focusing on it. On to the next slide then. So what to focus on when training your line managers? I appreciate that there's been quite a lot of information that we've given you on this webinar and lots of different areas to look at. But as with all the webinars we do, we try and give you a little taster of things to go away and think about. And when we share the slides, you can take them back and reflect and think about the areas that are going to make the most difference to your organisation. But I really like this research by the CIPD, which identified 5 behaviours that management needs. And I think it's a really kind of good way to sort of summarise what a manager really needs to focus on to be effective. And when you think of it in this context, that will help you build out sort of a process, a policy, a plan of what you're going to do next. But the 5 behaviours that it's identified that managers need are to be open, fair and consistent, to be able to handle conflict and problems effectively, to provide knowledge, clarity and guidance to their team, to build and sustain relationships. And that isn't just within their team. Remember that you're part of a wider organisation. So even as a line manager, you have a massive responsibility to the team that report into you, but you also have a responsibility to the people around you. In our organisation at MorePay, we have done quite a lot of work on a theory called the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which is really interesting. It's by a guy called Patrick Lencioni. And if any of you want to go and Google him, there's masses of information on there, and he's produced a number of books which can be read. But one of the theories that he talks about, and it's really around how to create a high-performing team. And if certain things aren't in place, it will create dysfunctions of a team. That's the basis of it. But one of the theories that he talks about, which really I really like, is he actually talks about the most important team that anybody can be part of is the one that they are part of with their peers. Now, it's automatically, I think line managers think that the people that I am looking after or the people that I report into me are the most important. And absolutely they are. And I speak as a line manager myself, that the people who report into me, it's absolutely important that they are right up there in terms of levels of importance. But it's also really, it's really critical to think about the peers around you and the relationships around you and how you build that across the business. Because even if this team on its own is performing in the best way it possibly can, the business will not work if that is not linked in. So I think line managers have got a great responsibility to link in with their peers and stakeholders around them. And I think that's really important in this part. They build, sustain relationships with their team, but also with their peers around them, and they encourage their teams to do so. And then the last thing on here is supporting the development of their team. It's crucial to think about where your team members want to go in the future as well, and how you can help develop and harness that. Are there other opportunities in the organisation? Are there training you can do? Is there on the job stuff they can do? Is there mentoring or coaching you can put in place? And help think about how you can help them stay and grow with the business. So to try and summarise this then, there's, as I said, a lot that we've talked about, but I really do think that it's thinking about how you can support line managers in addition to just thinking about training. That is one element you need to think about, but how do you help them learn and grow, and how do you put the foundations in place? My summary on this would be to make sure that this is a topic that you continually review, go back to, update, change, and keep talking about within your organisation. Keep asking people how they feel about their line managers. And this isn't just necessarily to be personal, but it's about line managers in general, although there may end up being something you need to pick up with one person. But how do the employees in your organisation feel about line managers? How do line managers themselves feel supported? Do they feel like they are fully equipped to be line managers? But it's a topic to keep talking about. This is the sort of thing that the more you talk about it, the more it just becomes part of your everyday culture, and the business and the employees themselves will start to see how important this is to you. But some key areas that you can focus on are here on the screen. And the first one is around recognition. So think about the channels that you use as a recognition. So obviously line managers have the option themselves to say thank you, to shout out teams, members in their weekly huddles or however they do it. But how can you help line managers recognise their team members to the wider audience? Is there company-wide meetings? Are there communication platforms? Is there a recognition tool? We use one called My Appreciation, and it's a bit like a social feed, like Facebook or Instagram, where you can put on a shout out and a thank you to somebody for doing something. Are you helping managers be able to do that? Because that kind of recognition is so important to individuals, and it will help the line managers to do that. Are you able to link it to rewards? If they're able to shout out, are they allowed to give them an award? Or is there a voucher that they can give for particular exceptional performance? Is it linked to bonuses, pay review? Just think about how you can make things easier for your managers to recognise good work in their teams. You know, it's a well-trodden path. We all know how useful recognition is in motivating employees. So look at how you can make it easier for line managers to do that. When looking at performance, make sure that as an organisation you've got the right policies in place to do that. That performance management process is an annual process. Is it a continuous process? There are lots of different ways to do this. Do you make it easy for them to do it? Are you still using paper-based documents, or have you managed to move on to a software that allows performance to be recorded in a much easier way? The quality of the software really does the hard yards for your colleagues with automated workflows and reminders, and makes life easier for line managers. Is this something that you could look to do to support and make life easier for them? Work with managers so that they understand but can then communicate the benefits of setting objectives and tracking them regularly, and then remind line managers to reward that success from good performance. We've talked about this a little bit already, but engagement, there are lots of little things that line managers can do to make sure that the team are engaged. But the biggest piece of advice here is looking at how you measure engagement. Is there a tool, a survey, pulse surveys? How do you measure engagement, and how do you understand how employees feel in general, but how they feel about their line managers, and potentially where you need to focus your effort? Look at how you can help create two-way feedback and a culture of there being two-way feedback, and think about templates on how to track progress against objectives around engagement. Do you have action plans after you've done the engagement surveys, and how can you support line managers in taking that forward? And then the kind of the last one on here is around work-life balance. Now, obviously, this is a topic that is talked about quite a lot in the media, LinkedIn. You'll see lots of articles, advice, posts on it, and it's something that since COVID has really sort of upturned in people who are job hunting, and that it's something that's really important to them. If you can within your business, how do you help bring this to the forefront with the line manager setting the example of work-life balance? You know, whether it's leaving the office a reasonable time, taking breaks, being able to switch off when they are on leave. What sort of things can you put in place? Even small things can really help people just feel like they have a work-life balance, and that the organisation is invested in them having a work-life balance, and line managers are really, really key to making this happen. I think we're on to the Q&A next, so I wanted to make sure we left time for this. Just before I go on to the Q&A though, yeah, thanks Hannah. Before we just go on, I just want to say a huge thank you for attending this, and apologies for my dog and the squirrel earlier. It's a really important topic, and one that I feel very passionately about, you know, even thinking about my own career in the first management position that I went into, where I was actually kind of just left to get on with it. And part of it you learn through experience and things cropping up and just having to deal with them. But I really do think that there is so much that organisations can do to support line managers in their roles, and keep continuing to support. Even if you feel like you've got a very experienced manager, there are always things that you can do to support and help them. I think it's a topic that's potentially sometimes overlooked in favour of other topics, But really, if you think about all the hot topics in HR, a lot of them do link back to the line manager's involvement in this. And I think it's a topic that should be continued to be looked at. So I'll hand over to Hannah to see if we've got any questions.
Yes, we have had a few questions come through. So the first question was, any advice for supporting line managers when dealing with difficult conversations, for example, conversations relating to employees who are regularly late or an employee who's been heard making sexist comments?
Yeah, this is always a tough one. I think the main piece of advice would be to tackle it and to kind of face the issues head on. There's not really anything to be gained from some sitting, waiting and watching. I'll kind of take the two examples were slightly different, but if there's somebody who's regularly late, you need to be sort of telling them as they go, and you know, when they've been late a couple of times, make sure that every time they are late, there is a recognition of it and that the employee knows that you've seen it, and then work out what your policy is. Do you have a policy on lateness? Or if you don't, think about what's appropriate and start taking the formal action. It might start off with some kind of informal conversation, setting guidance, boundaries, expectations, objectives, and really try and stick to the facts. With something like lateness, try and take the emotion out of it and try and stick to the facts. Something that's a bit more complicated to deal with is around something like sexual harassment, sexist comments, bullying or anything like that. That can be a little bit more of an emotional topic to deal with, but it still needs dealing with. These could be really serious issues to deal with. My advice there would be to seek the help of an HR professional in dealing with topics like that. I mean, in any ER case, try and get some HR advice, but particularly with very sensitive or complex ones, take the advice of HR. But in both instances, make sure that you tackle the issue head on and try and stick to the facts, and as much as possible, take the emotion out of it.
Thanks, Michelle. The next question is, when there is an existing lack of good leadership and good line management, what tips would you have for setting the foundations? I am in HR and line manager, and we have managers who are very reluctant to buy into that aspect of their role because we are such a client-oriented organisation.
That's a really tough one, and it isn't going to change overnight. I think the key thing is to try and get the leadership team on board with this and on board with the benefits. So when I talked about one of the slides about the potential pitfalls of underinvestment in this area, you know, those six things we called out really speak for themselves. And even in a client-focused organisation, those things are going to start to suffer if the line management isn't where it needs to be, because line managers have such a big impact on it. So it will probably be something that will take a bit of time, but it will be thinking about putting in kind of an action plan for line managers and how to upskill them, how to get them bought in, how to change slowly but surely the culture of the organisation to realise that this is important. Taking small steps, whether it's starting with training, starting with some kind of focus groups or communities, sharing ideas and what works in other teams. That works great in our organisation. You know, okay, we can see that from, you know, even from the engagement survey, this team over here has got a really high engagement score. What are they doing differently to other areas of the business? Just taking it step by step and putting together an action plan. It's something that could be just completely overlooked, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it. But I do appreciate the difficulties where it might not be at the forefront, but I would say keep trying, look at some of the advice that we've given in this webinar, and start to try and put together an action plan and keep it on the agenda.
Thanks, Michelle. We have had a few questions around this actually. I'll ask this one as well, just in case you have anything further to add. Any advice of how to deal with more senior line managers? I find the higher up the hierarchy you go, the more they are stuck in their ways, and it's difficult to coach them from a HR perspective.
Yes, it can be, and I've sat there in that very position in my days as an HR operational professional. It can be difficult, but it still can be done. And you know, years ago, there might have been more of a thought of, oh, just leave them, that, you know, they're good at this area of their job, so we'll forget the bit that they're not particularly good at. But I think making sure that there are clear guidance on the benefits of changing their line manager ways, or looking at it a different way. Again, it's kind of similar to the answer before. Small changes. Obviously, if it started to be something serious, it might just be that people don't particularly like their tone, or it could be something more serious that goes into things like bullying. Obviously, that has to be taken very seriously and a separate process followed. But if there are issues around their management style, which isn't really conducive to a productive and engaged environment, think about the things that you can put in place around that. Again, getting the buy-in of other senior leaders in the organisation, and trying some coaching and mentoring. Again, it's quite difficult, I understand that, but I have been in those situations where actually certain coaching can really open the eyes of people to things they haven't thought about before. And again, just try and embed it within your culture slowly but surely, and things will start to change. And over time, you do start to see a turnover of staff naturally, and that is always opportunities that when you're thinking of replacing people, look at the types of people that you want to bring into your organisation to reflect and mirror the culture that you want to create.
Thank you, Michelle. So the next question is, we are a startup and many of our managers inform me it's hard to role model work-life balance. Any ideas for dealing with that? And then the second part of the question is how to deal with gender differences in advice provided by male managers to female employees. So any tips for raising awarenesses of potentially closed-minded male managers?
Okay, yeah, two excellent questions. So I'll take the second one first. Around sort of gender, male and female differences, and potentially male employees taking a different view of female issues, or understanding their perception or point of view. Education is absolutely the key with this. Educating the workforce as a whole, and not just educating males about females. I wouldn't restrict it to that. I'd talk in general about all different types of diversity. Sometimes diversity or dignity at work training can really help here. Training line managers, but also training employees as well about how to understand differences within people. I've been on training courses and been part of the creation of training courses where we've actually tried to invoke some possibly difficult topic discussions during these training courses, just to get people to open their eyes to different perception and a different point of view. There are lots of topics at the moment that are gaining traction. One in particular that we're dealing with a lot at Morpay, and we get a lot of organisations asking them for how to create a menopause in the workplace policy. That could be an example of the type of thing that you're talking about. And again, it's around education, but I would widen it to all kinds of diversity and try and move people along. Obviously, there's always a legal aspect around discrimination of certain aspects, whether, you know, take, for example, pregnancy. So treating a female employee who is pregnant not in accordance with the law would actually be a disciplinary issue. But I guess this is more about the sort of general misconceptions or misunderstandings. So I would start with education. Hannah, just remind me of the first part of that question.
The first part was about work-life balance. So they're a startup company, and managers are saying it's difficult for them to role model work-life balance due to the pressure.
Yeah, I totally get that. And sometimes that isn't always possible. We always go through periods in our work careers, or even just in our daily work lives, where things are busier than others, but it's looking at how you can get that balance overall. I think, again, it starts with the leadership team understanding where the focus needs to be, where the efforts need to be. If there really is a lack of work-life balance, you know, what changes need to be made to address that. It's about getting that on the agenda to talk about it, even if there's not anything that can be done, you know, because I'm not suggesting that, you know, businesses can suddenly employ another 30 people to do the work and reduce that, you know, that's not likely to be feasible. But get it on the agenda with the leadership team that it is something that's an issue. If you are a startup and quite early on, think about, have you done an engagement survey? If you haven't, really consider doing one so you can understand not only how the line managers feel, but how the employees are feeling. And if you are starting to see a pattern where everybody is saying that they feel like they don't have a work-life balance, then that really is something that you need to address, even if it's just small things you're doing to address that. One of the things that we do at MorePay and across our parent company Zealous, and this started during COVID, is that we have a meeting blackout between 12 and 1, and that basically is put in everyone's diary so that people cannot book internal meetings between 12 and 1. Obviously, if there's external meetings with customers or things like that, and sometimes it doesn't always work, but it's slowly but surely become part of our culture. And it's only a very little thing, but it actually makes such a difference to all the people. So even if you are struggling, you can't employ extra people to do it, just think is that understand what the problem is, where the problem is, and then start to discuss as a leadership team what small things you could put in place to address that, and at least let people know you're thinking about it or you recognise that there's a problem.
Thank you, Michelle. So we've got time for just one or two more questions. So the next question is, how can I help employees with the transition from being a team member to becoming a manager?
There's lots of different ways that you can do this. Obviously, one of them is training. Is there any training courses that you can send them on, whether that's internally or externally? And I do think that is important to think about the more formal side of training. But a lot of it will be learning on the job, but make sure that whilst they're learning on the job, they've got the right support in place to do this. Because even if they've been on a training course that's done the basics of management, it might be 12 or 18 months into the role before they have to deal with an absence issue or a performance issue or even a gross misconduct issue. And now they're going to remember the details. Make sure they know where to go to ask questions, so they've got access to the people function or the HR function who can support them and handhold them through it. But in between that, look at getting them mentor. Is there a mentor in the organisation that they can learn from, bounce ideas off, start to understand? Are there informal groups or communities of managers that you can create so that they can ask questions, listen and learn from other people's experience? Sometimes the informal support is just as important as putting them through some kind of formal training. The biggest thing is just don't put them in the role and leave them to it and assume that they know how to do it, because it is really daunting going into a new people management role when you've not got much experience. Think about what a plan might look like for them and regularly review it with them.
Thanks, Michelle. So we'll move on to the last question now. So last question is, many of our managers feel like they're piggy in the middle. They feel stuck between the expectations of the staff that they manage and the demands of the senior leadership team. So how can the business help them balance this?
Yeah, it's a common problem and probably replicated in organisations up and down the country. I think the biggest thing that a manager could do is be open both with the upwards communication and the downwards communication, open on both sides. I think they need to tell their own leadership team what is particularly difficult, where they are needing support, and the leadership team need to ask the questions and listen to the responses and do something about it. I completely get that it can feel very them and us, but the worst thing a line manager can do is exacerbate that them and us mentality. I've been in organisations before where I have kind of heard managers say to their employees things along the lines of, yeah, I know this or that is really bad. It's not me, it's the management. And that just creates a real divide in the organisation. It can take quite a lot of time to come through that. One of the sort of the simplest ways I work with my team is to say, you know, all these difficulties, we are all just here trying to do our best, and for the most part just trying to do a good job. Yes, we've got different conflicting priorities, but be open with the leadership team and be open with your team about what those conflicting priorities are, and ask both your team and the leadership team for help and solutions in solving this. You know, ask the team what would make a difference. You know, I hear that you're feeling like this. I hear that you're saying, I don't know, I'm talking hypothetically, you're overworked, there's too much to do, it's not realistic. What would change that? And try and get them into solution mode as well, and then replicate that kind of upwards in communication as well. It's a really difficult one to solve that, and I do completely understand how that feels. But just make sure that you keep talking about it and try and get people bought in to the solutions.
Thank you, Michelle. So we'll close off the Q&A session now. I think that's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you to everyone that did ask a question. It's been really, really valuable to run through some of the issues that people have raised. So just a couple of things before we finish off. I will point you in the direction of our Knowledge Centre, which is easy to find on the main menu of our website. It's packed with lots of helpful resources, including upcoming webinars, demos, guides, blogs, and everything is free to download. And in the Knowledge Centre, you will see details of our live demo that follows on from today's topic. In the demo, we'll show you how our software helps drive line manager engagement so they can execute HR initiatives and power performance. The demo is taking place on the 26th of March, and I'll include details in the follow-up email that I'll send this afternoon, along with a copy of the slides and also a recording from today's session, so that you've got that to refer back to. And finally, if you would like to find out more about our HR and employment law services, please drop a message into the Q&A panel and one of my colleagues will contact you. Our HR advice line runs 24/7, 365 days a year, so no matter when an HR issue crops up, best practice employment law advice is always available over the phone anytime, and it's delivered by our highly experienced team of qualified experts. Here you can see some of the reviews that we've received on Trustpilot. So that just leaves me to say thank you to everyone that's joined the webinar this morning. I think it has been a really interesting, thought-provoking one, and thank you very much to Michelle for hosting. It's been brilliant. And like I say, you will be receiving an email this afternoon with the recording and also the slides. So thank you for taking the time to join us this morning.